And welcome to How Much Is Your Private Data Worth, the game show that tries to match your data to your wants and, well, actually, just your wants. I'm your host, Johnny Buchan, and our carryover champion tonight has two first names for his full name. It's Timothy Karen. Now, Timothy, last night you provided your favourite colours, recipe and your date of birth to Facebook to find out what unicorn you were in a past life. What did you do with last night's prize?
Well, Johnny, I traded my unicorn for 6 gluten-free beers and a patchouli-scented candle.
Wise man, wise man. So tonight we have even higher bidders. First off, for 1 month of free 5G Wi-Fi, what information are you willing to give to the Chinese company Huawei?
For that, I'd be willing to give my username and password to OkCupid. It's an account from before I met my wife, and I haven't used it in a while, but I recall some pretty salacious pictures of my armpits.
Oh, yes, armpits are always the way to go. And we've just received word that they are more than happy with that information, so you move on to tonight's final round. Are you ready?
Fantastic.
Timothy, Karen. What information are you willing to give a few Australian health officials in order to save hundreds, possibly thousands of lives, and to bring forward the date when we could begin to ease social restrictions during a global pandemic? Now, take your time. This is a very important decision and one that could make you out to be a government-loving liberal if you make the wrong choice.
You're asking me to share my private information and my location with the same government that doesn't know the difference between a website being attacked by a distributed denial of service and an unprecedented volume that should have been really easy to anticipate. I can't do it. I'm going to have to opt for tonight's consolation prize. And I'll go on TikTok to live stream me doing my internet banking.
Well, it's charming you think we don't already have that information, Timothy, but thanks so much for playing How Much Is Your Data Worth?
Spoiler alert, not much.
Hello and welcome to The Pouch, the soggy cigarette packet of podcasts that helps the average Aussie try and make sense of their current political environment. I'm Greg. I'm sure there's a virgin joke in there somewhere, savage.
And I'm Jake. When can I get a haircut? Gosh darn it. Far Wharton. On today's episode, we talk downers, uppers, and good old-fashioned partisanship.
And Jake, while we are snug as a bug in the proverbial rug, I want to know about this new government app and some of the security that lies behind the app. I know that it's very, very controversial at the moment, and I want to get to the bottom of,
it.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. There's a lot of information there.
All right, Jake. Well, we have a lot to get through tonight. I know that one of the things that sort of happened, which isn't in the script, and I'm just gonna, what's the point of having a script if Greg doesn't decide to go off the script? That's the point of having a script, isn't it? I want to just talk about Virgin just for a little bit because it's actually not really political, right? It's not really political news because the government's not doing anything about it. But we have been roped into a conversation about it. One of the interesting things to me is that the Virgin is not owned by, I don't think it's owned by an Australian company at all. I think it's all owned overseas. Richard Branson only owns 10% of it. He owns 10%. Yes. And he decided that he was going to get on his dodgy webcam and have a go at us. He said, around the world, other airlines are being bailed out by their respective governments, but it's a shame that it's not happening in Australia. And I kind of get it, right? I kind of get that on the one hand, regional Australia is very, very dependent on Virgin. So I totally, if the government decided to bail them out, I don't think I'd be upset by it, but I can see why they're not too. And I'm sort of a bit like, I don't know. I can see they don't want to play favourites. That's their line, isn't it?
Yeah, well, very early on, Alan Joyce, the CEO for Qantas, said, if you're going to do anything with those guys over there, you better be doubly sure that you're going to have to do it with us guys over here. So there is going to be a discussion about parity if the Australian government or any of the states decide to, jump in on the capital raising bandwagon. And moreover, there is going to be, I think, ultimately, Australia is going to have to get involved because, invariably there is not a lot of competition in the domestic market at the moment outside of regional Australia. Like rural and remote, they have Rex, they have other carriers, but in the rest of the domestic market, there is basically no real competition. You got Tiger, sure, sometimes.
Yeah, well, Tiger's owned by Virgin as well.
It is, yeah, exactly. So if one goes, the way that you set up these corporations is they are meant to be wholly separate entities. They are meant to, have their own balance sheets, etc. So one would hope that the failure of one doesn't necessarily mean the failure of the other. But goodness, Tiger has not been great. They've not been a great performer.
I have deliberately avoided Tiger in the past, I'll be honest with you. I've got some pretty funny stories about that.
I like landing softly.
And I'm not an economist, right? And I don't claim to have any different opinions of what I've heard on, The Drum or, other podcasts or anything like that. But the three interesting facts to me have been that, one, Virgin is owned purely by overseas entities, nothing to do with Australia at all, other than the bases in Queensland. Second, that they own Tiger, which I didn't know. They own Tiger as well. So Jetstar has got their Qantas has got Jetstar, and Virgin have got Tiger. So you're right. There's not a lot of competition, right?
No.
I think there's Rex after that.
And Rex is really only for the very rural and remote type flights.
That's pretty much how my kids get to school, using Rex. Yeah. So, and the third thing that I found out was that ANZAC was New Zealand owned.
I always thought it was Australian.
Well, me too. But they said on the news that it was New Zealand. So none of these airlines that have collapsed, because I sat my daughter down and I said, when I was your age, I watched ANZAC collapse and it was a devastating blow to the Australian people and blah, 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 blah. And now you're getting to watch Virgin collapse. But it's not even collapsing. Everyone who I've heard talk about this have basically said someone's going to come to the rescue and it's going to be actually pretty fine,
Yeah. So there is probably something pending, which so we've got probably about a week of more deliberations, which is really when the administration body that have been called in to do the
Doolittle or Doolittle or something, Dr. Doolittle.
Oh, the Deloitte. Economics. So they're in there at the moment doing the consolidation of debt, understanding what their who their creditors are, what the debt is, where it lays, who owns who owes money to us, how can we bring that in, etc. Ultimately, there is probably going to be an interjection by the ACCC, I dare say, particularly around that premise of competition in the Australian market, and there may be some form of requirement for the Australian government to get involved in ensuring that we have some form of competition in the Australian airline market. So we'll have to see. Probably late next week when we see the administration essentially being a little bit more public about what the balance sheet looks like, and I think they've got a little internal spat around who that administrator is actually going to be at the moment. I know PwC lost out by a little bit, and there was another one which is apparently a little bit more union friendly, and of course both pilots and the people, the steward people, what are they called? The people on the inside, the cabin crew.
Of the plane. The cabin crew. People on the inside of the plane. That's just what I've always called them. Excuse me.
Those people.
Person on the inside of the plane.
Excuse me, person on the inside of the plane. That'll be $700. Luckily, I keep
credit
that
card
in my...
only.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I think their workforce is heavily unionised, so there is some reason to suggest that third party that bidded on that on the administrator job may actually go to them. But we'll just have to see. And again, there may be some role for the government in this, depending on what the ACCC says and what sort of the strategy for the ACCC will be, particularly in the airline market.
Yep, and let's just hope that, for the sake of rural Australia and for the sake of those workers as well, that it ends up. I'm going to say it. It ends up being a less turbulent time. There you go.
Hey,
I got it out of my
loved
system.
it.
Got it out of my system.
I loved it.
Play some applause. Yay!
I would say the chairperson of Rex Airways just before the COVID situation occurred and, everybody started shutting down. The chairperson for Rex Airways said essentially, we're golden. We can shut down, we can pay our employees while we're on the ground, no issue. When everything starts up again, we'll start back up again. They have a few Dash 8s, so they're well placed to remain the regional airliner of choice. It's just what we do with the big domestic routes.
Yeah, and I like I've said, I'm not an economist, but if you can say it, if
you
someone
do play
could look
one on TV though.
If someone could look me in the eye and say, "Gosh, you've got great eyes, Greg," they're just fantastic eyes. If someone could do that, I'd be more than happy. Now, if someone could look me dead in the eyes and say, "Look," or look me straight in the eyes and say, "Look, they did. Virgin did absolutely everything they can. There was no buybacks of shares. They really, really tried hard to save money in case of like a global pandemic. They tried really hard, but they just simply couldn't do it." Maybe I'd feel a little more lenient towards them, I guess, but I don't know whether anyone can do that. I mean, were they selfish enough over time that this is the punishment that they get? I don't know.
These massive companies, particularly these massive airliners, the reality is that they carry a lot of debt. The other side of this reality is that they are all trying, this is the competition landscape. Because there are two players in the landscape, they have to fight over the price of airfares, essentially. That is their differentiator. That is their main differentiator between, Qantas and Virgin. So if Qantas cuts their price on a Sydney to Melbourne flight, then Virgin also has to do the same.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that their cost of that flight has gone down. It just means that they've had to undercut their competition in order to gain enough market share. So, this business is a cutthroat business, and Qantas is much bigger domestically. And it carries the weight of Australian pride and tradition. So instantly, if you ask me, who do I think of first when you say Australian airline, the first thing I go to is Qantas. And that is what most Australians think. Therefore, they're more likely to go for the Australian airline. So the main differentiator again goes to price. So we just have to see what happens here. It will be incredibly interesting to see whether the government gets involved, and certainly whether the Queensland government gets involved, because of course the base is there, which means employees, which means employment. So we'll just have to see.
Well, they offered him 200 million, didn't they, or something? But
that's not enough. That carries them for 10 minutes. Oh, thanks. That was a nice 10 minutes.
I hate the fact
Can we have more, sir?
$200 million is nothing. And and again, this is a slightly comedy podcast, just for the record, just in case this video ends up being up on Facebook. I almost wished it was Qantas going under, Jake, just so that we wouldn't have to worry about a cease and desist with the whole red kangaroo situation.
Oh, yes. That's interesting, isn't it? Ours is more burgundy.
Yeah. I mean, look, I sort of just went with the red kangaroo anyway. I was like, if we're going to cease and desist, I will change it to blue. That's fine. I don't mind. Surely they haven't copyrighted like kangaroos.
No, I dare say they have. They probably have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Greg, this weekend is ANZAC Day, the day where we all
go to our driveways.
Go to it. Well, yes. Well, it's the day where we commemorate the service that servicemen and women and indeed service animals have sacrificed the time that they have sacrificed in order to serve our country. And this year is a little bit different in that we aren't going to dawn services at our local what is it called, monument?
Yes.
At our local ANZAC monument for that dawn service. Are you going with the ads on TV that say you should walk to the bottom of your driveway, light the driveway? I think they're saying.
Yes,
light the night, light the morning.
We have a bit of a plan. Our plan is that the people in our street are actually going to be doing like a bit of a concert. So I guess there's a few people along the street who know how to play the bagpipes, and they're going to be playing those. There's a few trumpet players I've heard that are going to be outside their driveways. My lovely wife has designated me to be to play a song. So I think I'm going to be playing I Was Only 19.
That's awesome.
I'm pretty sure I just burped. So I'm going to be playing I Was Only 19 on the guitar, and I'll do it with my loop station. I think I'm going to practice that tomorrow with my stepdaughter. So her and I will that's our contribution. It's a little more rocky, I guess, than what everyone else is doing. But yeah, what are you doing?
Well, I'll just be walking to the bottom of my driveway holding a candle and so we have a return service leaver. We have a vet in our little family. My stepdaughter's
little family, Jake.
Well, the more immediate side
with a name like Far Wharton.
Yeah. Well, actually, the the Italian side of the family, which is the big side of the family, is Brunetto, and that's a very big family. But so my stepdaughter's boyfriend is a vet, and so we'll give him a call and wish him well and thank him for his service. And it's a time for reflection that we obviously enjoy a lot of freedoms in our country, and we enjoy a lot of freedoms in our society, and we have a lot of people to thank, some of those who didn't come home for their sacrifice. So it's always a somber day. But it will be an interesting one in that we're unable to, we normally see the odd vet at the commemorations that take place at the monuments, and that's obviously not possible today or this week rather. So it'll just be a different one, but I think it's important that we do sort of show our thanks for their service.
Yeah, it's so great that people are still connecting, and that I've gotten to know a few of my neighbours and a few of the people along the street purely because of these purely because of this situation that's occurred as well. So kudos to them. They get my kudos for the week. My neighbours.
Yes. The new award, the new award that Greg gives out every week, the inaugural award of kudos.
All right, now, Jake, I love it when our paths cross with the US politics, and so this is a particularly good one because we get to talk about Alexander Downer, who's just one of my favourite politicians for no particular reason. Yeah, I just love him. Can I tell you why I love him? Character. Yeah, you can tell me why you love him.
It's two reasons. Number one, his voice. He has
isn't it a great voice?
He has a non-condescending voice. So he is an extremely highly intelligent person. And I always enjoyed listening to him speak. But his voice meant that while he was, opining using, very long and interesting words and concepts, he didn't appear at all condescending. Now, the second reason is he's got curly hair, and it's just kind of funky. He's got it in. He's got short back and sides, but then curly hair at the top. It's just the best.
Yeah.
Love it.
And like you said, he's a very intelligent person, and this is a particularly great story because I love the fact that an Australian diplomat, is that what we're calling him?
Yeah.
He's an Australian diplomat, was responsible for basically the whole Russian collusion situation, which
There was
as
no
everything
collusion.
does, as everything does, it ended up working in Donald Trump's favor. But
Yes.
what a thing for an Australian to kick off. So
Exactly.
this is still ongoing. They have an investigation into the origins of the particular. What do you call it? The origins of the particular allegations that were made. So talk us through what's happening with that at the moment.
The interesting thing here is that as Australia essentially had no knowledge of that information before Alexander Downer reached out to the US Embassy in London, where he was quite close to the US Embassy in London in 2016 in July, to essentially say that he was a little bit worried that there was this potential information or this potential for collusion between the US and Russia. But he had absolutely no authority from Canberra to do so. So this information is coming out from the new memoir from former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, who released that this week, which was I do miss Malcolm Turnbull and his we were just speaking about how Alexander Downer speaks in a non-condescending way, which is the exact opposite to the way that Malcolm Turnbull speaks.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a separate story on its own, isn't it? But
It is.
Just quickly, from my point of view, it's such an odd time for Malcolm Turnbull to be doing this because Scott Morrison is so beloved by people at the moment. I mean, it's so bizarre that he would choose right now to start bagging out the Liberals when everyone's a bit on the sort of Liberal bandwagon. I don't know why he didn't just wait until... I agree with a few of the commentators in that it degrades the former Prime Minister whenever whenever they bring out this sort of, this gotcha sort of stuff. It degrades their standing for a start. And I just don't think it's degraded him in my eyes too. It's just deal with it. Like, you're in politics, buddy. Now that he's chosen this time, rather than like pre-election or something, he's chosen now when the government is beloved by a lot of people. You know,
well,
you can't bag him out on one hand and then everyone's getting $750 into their bank accounts the next day. I mean, that's not going to work, is it?
Yeah, but that's a good strategy, frankly. So I disagree with you entirely for the following reasons. And you're right, it is a separate story. But while we're talking about it, look,
we don't need to follow a script.
The fact is that, Malcolm Turnbull remains a Liberal. He remains a Liberal Party member. And, he doesn't necessarily want to hurt them. He just wants to make sure that the facts are straight. And, his story is part of the historical record. And as a, political boffin, I freaking love this stuff. I was so excited when I saw that Lee Sales was interviewing him because I was like, oh my God, there's going to be some salacious Monday night political ramblings from the former Prime Minister dishing on that. It was just the weirdest challenge from Malcolm Turnbull, and I loved the commentary that he gave on the premise of Peter Dutton potentially gaining the prime ministership, but the strategy that was employed in order to get Scott Morrison into the prime ministership, holy moly. Anyway, it's worth watching that 7:30 interview.
Yeah,
with
I
Lee
just
Sales.
haven't got around to watching it
nuts.
yet. Yeah, I haven't got around to watching that yet. I am very keen. You think that because I run a weekly political podcast that I probably would have watched it by now, but
it's on the will watch list.
Give me the one sentence summary.
Well, essentially, Scott Morrison, this is all hearsay and from a former Prime Minister who was scorned. But sort of the gist is Scott Morrison calculated the numbers behind the scenes and manoeuvred to support Malcolm Turnbull whilst making, I suppose, a manoeuvre that would see Peter Dutton run for the seat of Prime Minister, but not necessarily get it. So you'll see in the interview, essentially, Malcolm Turnbull said, if we go into this party room, into this cabinet, and there is a motion to spill the leadership, I will do it and I will not run. I will leave Parliament altogether.
Yeah, right.
And that happened. So he said, "I'm out." At which point, Peter Dutton did not have the numbers.
No.
And Scott Morrison did. So there was just some strategic. It was just somebody's playing chess back there.
I literally fired up my Sportsbet account when all that was going on, and I think I've mentioned it before, maybe in episode like 1 or 2 of the podcast. I think it was episode 1 actually, because our first episode we talked about Malcolm Turnbull. It was called "What Happened to Malcolm." I thought we loved him.
Yeah,
and I said that I'd put. It was Julie Bishop, wasn't it? And I put $20 down on Julie Bishop to win because I was just so sure she was going to win. And then this dude, Scott Morrison, comes out of nowhere. And anyway, all of a sudden.
Well, not out of nowhere. It seems that he was.
No. Well, according to the Australian public, out of nowhere.
In the shadows. But yeah, no, it was fascinating. So just a little bit more on this story. So the essentially when the concerns were raised between USA and Russia from Alexander Downer, he was acting as the Australian High Commissioner to the UK, and he met with one of the Trump aides, George Papadopoulos, in London in May 2016, and was told that the Russians had, quote, damaging material on Democrat candidate Hillary Clinton. And so while Mr. Downer mentioned this in the cable that was sent to the Department of Foreign Affairs, the information was not acted upon until later, until well later, essentially after it had gone out. So, yeah, look, it was quite interesting. Malcolm Turnbull actually in his memoirs said that the Australian ambassador at the time in Washington DC, Joe Hockey, former treasurer of Australia in the Federal Liberal Party. He praised him essentially for making sure that Donald Trump did not conclude that releasing this information or that giving this information essentially to the US Embassy wasn't thought of as an anti-Trump conspiracy, as so many other things, no doubt, were or are.
Yeah, exactly. And like we've said, it ended up working in his favor because now Donald Trump has this sort of thing in his back pocket, that he can pull out at any time. Same with the
no collusion.
No collusion, the hoax, he's got a couple of things there. So anytime the Democrats sort of bring up something now, he's got that in his back pocket. So anyway, but that's getting a little bit off the topic of American politics. But it's great to see that there's still a little bit of crossover there. And I know that Malcolm talked about he talked about his relationship with Donald Trump, something about him not being a bully or saying something you don't want to succumb to the bully or something like that. You don't have to listen to them or something. Did you catch what he said there?
He's spoken about that whole relationship, that interplay between himself and Donald Trump several times in the past, and it was pretty well exactly the same sort of stuff. Essentially him saying, the US can try to intimidate and has tried to intimidate, not just obviously in the current situation, but in previous situations. Probably, the last time that we had a proper bully was very early on in the second term or just before the second term of the Bush presidency when 9/11 occurred and Australia ended up going to war alongside as an ally of the US in the Middle East, and that was a massive thing. And there was it was postulated that there was some amount of coercion for Australia to go ahead and do that.
Jake, we don't touch on drugs very much in the show, probably because they don't come up very much, and especially in this isolation situation. Goodness me. But
what a great time for drugs, right?
Well, it's possible that you might agree then with MP Andrew Robb, who wants MDMA, which is a key ingredient. It's not actually ecstasy, is it? I presume ecstasy is like cut with other things, to use the parlance of our times. But MDMA is the actual is the compound. Is the compound. You can tell I'm right onto this one. To help people struggling with mental health during quarantine. Talk us through it. What's happening? This is a story from ABC News.
Yeah, so the former Coalition MP Andrew Robb, who is now a board member of Mind Medicine Australia, is driving this fresh campaign to introduce drugs such as you said, MDMA and psilocybin, which is found the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, as a treatment option for people suffering from mental health, particularly during the COVID lockdown. So the not-for-profit Mind Medicine Australia, which aims to, quote, establish safe and effective psychedelic treatments, is urging governments to establish a mental health task force for a mental health task force for COVID-19, and wants these treatments to be on the table when it happens. Quote from former MP Andrew Robb says, quote, "It is potentially the most significant innovation in mental health that we've seen in decades." So while he said that he didn't advocate for things like MDMA or ecstasy or psilocybin to be used recreationally, he did say that psychedelic-assisted therapy should be available as a treatment in the same way that cannabis is.
I mean, look, my view is that obviously it makes people feel good, right?
Yeah.
Most people, I imagine, would feel good.
Sure.
And so maybe it helps you like open up.
Yeah.
Is what I've read.
I think
on the internet. It's hard to talk about this without like sounding like you've taken it.
Yeah, I get it. So the interesting thing here is that I'm not actually sure that it is that premise of being administered the drug and then having for example, a psychologist appointment and discussing your thoughts and feelings, etc.
A very long one,
with Cheetos provided. No, I think it's actually more the impact on brain chemistry that it does. So I mean that's from what I've read, and to be frank, I haven't read a great deal into the clinical use of otherwise recreational drugs, but
yeah.
Andrew Robb did point to clinical trials for substances being conducted overseas, including there's one at Harvard which led to 60 to 80% remission rates for depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. And the Mind Medicine Australia institution said that the federal government could use powers under the Therapeutic Goods Act to fast-track the availability of these treatments so that they were available to those who had or would suffer dramatically through this pandemic.
I mean, I just can't fathom how people would be suffering during this time, like how people are coping with not having access to their therapists, not having that access to people, not having access to those one-on-one sessions, social interactions. I mean, it breaks my heart to think about who, these people who are suffering alone. Because mental health obviously is one of those issues where it's unseen. Yeah. Like, I mean, if I have a physical disability or something like that, you can see it. But if I have a mental disability, you can't see it. So it's often just that sort of, get over it, or, go outside, do some gardening or something like that. And we know now, thanks to a lot of different campaigns and education around this area, that's not the case. You can't just go and do certain things. You really need access to professionals, and you need access to social interactions for that very reason. You can't. I mean, a telehealth is one thing, right? If I have a bit of a sore stomach or something like that, I can get a telehealth thing, and I did that the other day. It was great, but I don't know, mentally to sort of sit here with a webcam and to do that, have a session like that is sort of, it's a bit weird. You don't know where to look, do you, for a start? Like I'm constantly looking at myself in the thing, and then, like making sure my hair's okay, all that sort of stuff. You just don't get that opportunity to just sort of relax into it. So I don't know. I mean, look,
I think, the psychologist appointments are available by one of the Medicare benefit schedule item numbers that was released as part of the COVID response was ones around access to psychologists via telehealth means, and maybe it's useful because in a the case of acute depression, maybe the hair isn't done. Maybe you are looking a bit disheveled, and the camera can actually say a lot. I'm speculating, obviously, but I think ultimately, if that is the only avenue and that is sufficient for you, because, no two cases of depression or mental health, anxiety, whatever it happens to be, are the same. Invariably, they all have to be sort of treated and tailored holistically, really, to the individual. But it is one of those things that, I hope that it's enough for enough people. To have access to telehealth or video conferences with psychologists or with psychiatrists, depending on the type of care, because acute care in a hospital at the moment probably isn't so nice. Well, it's never nice in that area, but it's a fraught environment already for the nurses and doctors working in that environment at the moment.
Absolutely. And then when you take into account that if people are suffering from mental health issues and they're turning to drugs during this time, it's possible that it's better that it's controlled. Yeah. We control 100%. The amount of the amount of alcohol that you can get. If you go, well, I just want to drink some light beer tonight, you can go and get a controlled amount of that particular drug, right? If you want to, I'm not advocating it, but if you want to get slaughtered or hammered or whatever they call it, you can go and do that, right? But it's controlled still. You know how much is in there. So, I think controlling these and doing it in a way that's targeted and gives people options that will hopefully help them, I think is a decent thing. Yeah.
Yeah. The control part is the important part. And actually, I'd say the most important part is that any drug that is going to be used, let alone trialed in Australia, in any country, has to be appropriately regulated by the government, has to be appropriately tested, and ultimately has to be accredited for use in that country. So, as much as Andrew Robb has said, yeah, sure, this treatment could be fast-tracked, it needs a lot of testing, as does any drug, before you give it to your first patient. You need to train the doctors, you need to train the nurses on how to administer it, what dosages are appropriate, and how to treat somebody who perhaps is gone a little bit over the edge or has had a little bit too much. So, all of these things need to be worked out. There need to be protocols developed. That's not quick. But it is good to be talking about mental health in this pandemic, because it is a lot of mental health sufferers suffer in silence, and it is one of those things that particularly as we think about Anzac Day as well, it is one of those crossover things that people are thinking about, particularly veterans. They are thinking about their time in a war zone, and so it is super important.
I was going to say too, it's sometimes about the conversation, isn't it? Sometimes just triggering off this sort of conversation and maybe saying something that's going to make it into the news, like we can fast track it, it can trigger off that conversation. So it might not necessarily be about what happens now. It might be about the fact that the conversation has started and it gets people thinking, and then that puts it into the sphere of conversation, the conversation sphere. And from there...
The consphere.
That's right. Yeah. And look, it's made it onto the pouch.
Yep.
We've got 2 people watching on Facebook at the moment. Who knows what sort of influence those 2 people might have. Jake, speaking of trust in the government, and speaking of what rights you have, I'm fascinated by this new app that's coming out. Now, I'm going to say it straight off the bat. I will be downloading this app and I will be handing over whatever data to whichever health official is going to be getting it. I don't mind in the slightest, only because... Look, I just want to do my bit, really, and I'm confident there's people out there in Facebook land, and there's people out there on the internet who at the moment are saying to themselves, Greg, you twit. How dare you trust them? I just am going to. And there's nothing you can do to change my mind. But so I'm curious to see what sort of I guess what are the arguments for the actual app, right? Because people are saying that it's very secure, that it won't go to the government. It goes to health officials. And there's a lot of people saying that it's actually really secure.
Yeah, I mean, so to your two questions, what is the purpose of it? Well, the purpose of it is essentially to increase the ability of people performing the role of contact tracing. So essentially, if you come into contact with somebody who has coronavirus, if you've come into contact with them for a certain amount of time over the last 21 days from the time that they're tested, then people in public health officials want to be able to contact you. And their biggest bane at the moment is getting the telephone numbers of, hey, that random person that you cut their hair, 6 weeks ago, and all you got was their first name and the last 3 digits of their phone number. How the heck is the public health official supposed to get that person's name? So that's the purpose of the application. It's to improve the contact tracing ability for our public health officials.
Yep.
As for will the government have access to your information? Is the actual government, is the federal government going to have your information? The answer is yes. They're setting up a data store in order to store all of the information, because. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on the app because, frankly, there's not a lot of actual information. There's a lot of speculation over it.
Right.
But there's not a lot of actual information. There's a bit. Yeah. But even that it's not complete. They're still actually going through the thing called the PIA, or the privacy information assessment, and that thing, which I've done 1,000 of them myself, that they take an incredible amount of time, and they're not easy to do while you're actually developing the the thing at the same time. How are you supposed to write an impact assessment on something that's actually not complete?
And you don't want it to be easy, do you? I mean, you want these things to be hard. Now what is it called? The IPA? What did you call it?
The IPA?
Yeah.
PIA, Privacy
PIA
Impact Decision.
Is not
the
to
IPA
be confused.
is another thing. Don't confuse the IPA with the PIA.
Or the API, right? And we received an email from Liam, and he was saying
classic
that
Liam, right?
Classic Liam, right? He said the system will have an API that public or health authorities can use, and since it will be built into the operating system, you don't have to download an app. Yep. So what is the API, and why does it matter in this case?
Well, we are not going to get the API version essentially as part of so the app that's being developed by the federal government takes the same code essentially from the app that was developed by Singapore and released late in March. To essentially allow people to leave their houses and be allowed to go into stores. The Singaporean app, it's pretty cool. They will actually use it. So if you've got the app on your phone, you can show it to a store, for example, who may not be letting in people for fear of COVID.
Really?
So they'll look at the app, and on the app it says, hey, you're all green and good to go, whatever. So you haven't come into contact with somebody who has it. That said, only 20% of Singaporeans have actually downloaded the app, but so grain of salt. But no, it was really cool. In terms of APIs, an API is essentially it's an interface. It's an application. It stands for Application Programming Interface, but it's a little applet, if you like, a little application that enables the transmission of data from one source into another source. It's a lot of pretty well all of the stuff that we do between, say, like our private health insurance and your specialist there might be an API that translates what the private health insurance. I'm really explaining this poorly, but there's no fun in explaining what APIs are. Essentially, it's just a translator of information from one source to another.
So, let's go on to the fact that the government's got the hard sell here, because the spokesperson for this is Stuart Robert,
Yes.
who infamously, notoriously,
I like it.
said my bad after the Centrelink website crash.
Yes.
So obviously not one for apologizing.
Yeah, well, so the thing here is
for potential mistakes. It's not good.
The thing here is, I don't actually think that you've got anything to fear here from the privacy side. Again, I'm sort of talking a little bit, from a position of ignorance because we don't have an enormous amount of information on the app itself. And while the government has said that they would release the privacy impact assessment, that has not come out yet. So we'll just have to see. But, I don't think that privacy is really the reason why you would not get that. As you said, I really think that the only reason that you would not get it is because of who is going to be in charge of the program, the MP Stuart Robert.
Yeah.
For a couple of examples of why you might not let's say trust Stuart Robert or programs underneath him. So just a little bit on him personally. He named his father a couple of years ago as a company director and his parents' home as the principal work address for a company that was responsible for tens of millions of dollars of government IT projects. He accepted a Rolex watch from a Chinese business person.
How do you know that? What is that? I never saw that
this
story.
Was a news story. This is in addition to being on his Wikipedia page under what do you call it? Starts with F.
Follicles.
Scandals. It was scandals. That totally starts with an F.
Not F.
Yep. So it was under scandals. Under scandals. So he mistakenly accepted a Rolex watch from a Chinese business person who was trying to essentially get time with him and potentially his ear and favor. But he also, interestingly enough, breached ministerial standards for having shares in a mining company of a Liberal Party donor, which, by the way, Bridget McKenzie lost her portfolio for so much less.
Yeah. He certainly has seemed to have powered through a few scandals.
Yeah. Well, I've got one more, and there were more, but I've got one more that I picked out, and
these are just some of the lesser known ones as well for this.
Well,
poor
I picked
fella.
these out because these had a little bit to do with IT. I mean, obviously not the mining one, but the first one was absolutely an IT related one, as is the next one. He charged taxpayers just under $40,000 for his own home internet usage.
Yeah,
so,
right.
It's just a bit wonky. But in terms of what he's been responsible for as a portfolio minister, he was the minister responsible for the Centrelink robo-debt fiasco, which will see upwards of $500 million paid back to the vulnerable people who were wrongfully forced to pay debt that they didn't have, because of essentially an algorithm that, went past his desk. And, while on the one hand, you want to say he's the guy at the very, very top of an organization, essentially.
Yeah, like the figurehead, right? Like he's just it's a facade. Yeah, he's just the person who's
I
there.
don't think so. No,
he's not doing the coding.
Well, he's not. That's it. And I don't want to refer to them as a figurehead because they do have discretion. A minister's role is essentially to manage their portfolio of things, and they should absolutely. As somebody who's looked at project dashboards and portfolio dashboards a million times over my
I'm
career.
looking at some project dashboards now. Let me tell you, if I could turn this webcam around, you'd see some project dashboards.
I would see some of the best. All of them green. All of them green.
Second best.
But you would essentially imagine that there would be a lot of things going past his desk that he would have to approve, such as risk statements, issue statements. This issue was unable to be closed off as we were going through the project. And that issue had to do with an algorithm that was extrapolating people's debt. And we found that 45% of people who had extrapolated debt upon did not actually owe that money that we accumulated debt on. So, look, the question that really many Australians will need to ask themselves over the coming week as this app is released is would they trust this guy to fix their PC if he rolled up in a Geek Squad van, let alone would they trust him to anticipate privacy and data retention issues and get rid of the central data store at the end of the process?
Yeah, look, and I think if I've got it correct, the health minister, what's his name? Greg Hunt?
Yep.
Right, yep, go me. Look, see, we're getting there. Greg Hunt,
he shares a first name with you.
That's right. That's a good start. I can get 50% of the way there. And then he said that people have very legitimate concerns over the privacy, over privacy. And I thought that was very brave of him to say that. You know, on the one hand, to sort of say, like because it could have been misconstrued quite quickly about what he was saying, right? But what he is saying is your concerns about privacy are legitimate, but the app itself addresses those concerns. So you should continue to be concerned about privacy, and it's a very, very big issue, especially these days. You know, put your trust in this particular app. So the government is backing themselves on this one, as they should.
Well, at least part of the government. There are still some very high-profile coalition MPs who have said the exact opposite. For
are they?
Not the exact opposite.
They're not downloading it. It's going to collect all of your data.
Barnaby Joyce said, quote, "I treasure the government knowing as little about me as possible."
I love it when Barnaby Joyce talks.
Says stuff. Yeah, exactly. But
unless he's on Twitter with the backdrop of sheep, I don't listen to him.
Yeah.
I don't listen to him.
No, I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. But, despite all this, much like you, the promise of being in a position to be quickly notified in the event of a contact trace and, of course, doing my part to manage COVID as a member of society will mean I will download the app when it becomes available.
I will too. I think, Jake, what we should do too is we should call each other up and download the app and do a little live thing, where we sign up for it.
Yeah, let's do it. Absolutely.
Jake, thank you so much for talking with me today. Just in general,
yes.
It helps with my mental health to get all this stuff out that I've been thinking about all week. It really helps to sit down with you. Yeah, I mean, I've stopped shaving, so, I may as well just grow out the dreads and have them,
Very nice.
dangling in front of the microphone. I wouldn't even need the windbreaker anymore. I could just have my dreadlocks just around the microphone.
The windbreaker.
What's it called?
Pop filter. But it's very funny. I love it. Let's call it a windbreaker from now on.
Yeah, it's a windbreaker.
Yeah, for when you break wind.
It's a jacket for my microphone. It's better than a dead cat anyway.
That's true. I've got one of those.
Yeah. I got one of those too. There you go. Bit of videography joke in there. It is. I think I'm going to put this up on ANZAC Day. So it is ANZAC Day. It was a bit of a somber day, and hopefully everyone's taking some time to reflect on how lucky we are to live in Australia and to reflect on those who have made sacrifices for us to be incredibly lucky. Jake, once our listeners have finished feeling incredibly lucky, if you want them to continue feeling very lucky, what would you like them to do?
Well, I would love for them to hit subscribe on their podcast viewer of choice. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by searching for The Pouch, the podcast. And please do rate us. It helps other people to find us.
It sure does. The more rates and reviews we get, the bigger we become, the bigger and stronger we become. So if you do want to share the love, you can tell your friends to head to thepouchthepodcast.com and choose your favorite podcast player of choice and subscribe that way. Jake.
We got there, Greg.
You are a good-looking man.
We got there, Greg.
Thank you so much for chatting with me this week, and I look forward to talking to you again in the very, very near future.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you, listeners.
I've become one with my windbreaker.
Oh, my nose.